Greetings, I'm Jan Newton, and it's my pleasure to lead off this talk shared with Melissa Poe about our NOAA-funded project to assess regional vulnerability to ocean acidification in a specific location, the outer coast of Washington, the home of 4 U.S. treaty tribes for millennia. This is a transdisciplinary study, as evidenced by our long list of contributors comprising oceanographers like me, social scientists like Melissa, tribal partners as co-PIs, as well as federal and local partners. Together, we co-designed this project to examine risk to the resident tribal communities who live here and have relied on the ocean and its resources since time immemorial. The essence of a regional vulnerability assessment is that it is place-based, regional, therefore embedded in the context of specific environmental and social characteristics. The Olympic coast of Washington State is unique for several reasons. First, it has very strong variation in water properties, best captured by this quote from Adrian Sutton that the Cheba mooring has the highest subseasonal variability of all mooring sites in the NOAA Ocean Acidification Program Global Network. Second is the strong ties that the 4 U.S. treaty tribes have to the ocean and its resources. As Joe Schumacher of the Quinault Indian Nation said, the tribes of the west coast of the U.S. are literally on the front line of ocean acidification impacts. We have a responsibility to know so we can plan for an uncertain future. And lastly, we're really lucky to have a rich array of OA relevant data, thanks to partners you see here. So the strong motivation coupled with many resources made for a competitive proposal, but we needed an approach co-designed by the partners in order to allow for effective vulnerability assessment. So here is that step-by-step approach, which can be overwhelming when you view it like this. But if I break it up to look like this, you can understand it better. The social science steps are in blue, the ocean science steps in orange, and work from everyone together in green. On the outer ring, you see our values that the team shared. Today, we share some highlights of this approach put to practice. To start, up at the top, is the need to scope the local risk environment and priority needs, which for us was the Olympic coast and the need to sustain tribal resiliency in light of a changing ocean due to ocean acidification and its effects. The first 4 steps co-produce an understanding of the situation, both the social and oceanographic conditions, how that will change in the future, and when and where harmful ocean conditions will occur. The resulting knowledge then enables evaluation of the risks to ecosystem resources important to the partners and the societal vulnerability. The remainder of the approach is working together with the community to identify effective responses. It's now my pleasure to turn the talk over to Melissa.
The human dimensions of ocean acidification remain poorly understood, largely owing to partial views of the interconnections between the ocean and people. Existing studies have helped to characterize potential economic impacts to fisheries, but what other risks might be important to anticipate? Using ethnographic interviews with tribal communities of the Olympic coast, our findings show that many fish, shellfish, plants, birds, and mammals are important to communities. As such, the Olympic coast is better understood as a social ecological system with varied human connections. Not only recognizing the importance for livelihoods such as commercial fishing, commercial clam digs, and tourism, but also a healthy ocean is important for many other social dimensions, including cultural heritage, identity, spiritual values, and governance, as well as subsistence for traditional and ceremonial foods, intergenerational knowledge transfer, social and community cohesion, among other values and benefits. This more comprehensive view of the local social ecological system, in particular for indigenous place-based communities, can reveal how exposure to ocean acidification and other ocean changes could impact communities in unique and disproportionate ways by virtue of their cultural ties to OA-sensitive species, as well as underlying socioeconomic conditions. To better understand the structural conditions in the region and the spatial distribution of resources, services, and hazards, we also synthesized existing socioeconomic data, such as data collections from the U.S. Census, state public health records, and the like. We focused on those indicators that local decision makers and planners identified through surveys as priority information. We then assessed changes over time and across space from community to regional to state level aggregations. Take these two domains as examples. Looking at both food security and education, we can see disparities in the conditions across social and spatial units. This analysis reveals that vulnerability and adaptive capacity are uneven, where some communities, particularly those most dependent on the ocean, face greater risks than others. This is an environmental justice concern. Deeper understanding of the complexity of the ties to the ocean and varied capacities among coastal communities enables us to better anticipate the human risks from biological changes and target better tailored responses.
So we turn now to the oceanographic and biological science steps that you see here to look at current and future conditions and their differences to assess where and when stressful conditions will exist. These present-day seasonal projections of the percent of the upper water column undersaturated with respect to aragonite from Samantha Sidlecki and her NOAA-funded JSCOPE project really show the strong spatial and seasonal variability of the Olympic coast. Assessing climate change on such a highly dynamic environment can be challenging. We were incredibly fortunate that Sam and others were funded by the Wendy Schmidt Foundation to make forecasts for the end of the century that we then used to understand how current and forecast conditions mapped onto areas occupied by species of concern identified by the tribes. We not only looked at the distribution of the variable state, its variability, but also when and where assumed thresholds were crossed for OA variables, oxygen, and temperature. As an oceanographer, my conceptual view of the coastal ocean already entailed much complexity given the variability, the multiple stressors, and also the many species of interest, some shown here. But now I see this. While I've always appreciated temporal and spatial variation, this project has added to my view the human community, and that to assess regional vulnerability, we must think in context of human uses of organisms, as well as their individual life histories and geographic distributions. So to evaluate risk, we synthesized the oceanographic observations, species locations, as well as the current and projected model output to look at conditions where and when the species are found, and to evaluate thresholds and frequency metrics. We have produced a very large compendium of mapped model output covering different variables, times, and metrics that reveals the overall changes, and it also allows for exploration to understand the highest risk within a specific temporal, spatial, or organismal context. Here's one quick story as an example. Razor clams are a very important food and resource to the coastal tribes. These clams settle on the coast in April and May. So how is ocean acidification going to affect the saturation state of aragonite in deep waters during May? On the left, we see the change between the present and future omega aragonite in May. We see a decrease in omega of upwards of 1, and that it is most pronounced along the coastline, including where razor clams live. On the right, we see the change in the percent of time that omega is undersaturated during May. The razor clam sites, shown in diamonds, show around a 50% increase in that duration, signaling a much more challenging environment for larval clam development. We are still analyzing these outputs, and I've shared only part of the razor clam story. I'm happy to relay that Hallie Berger just published the Dungeness crab story from this project. We look forward to working with the team on the implications of all of these analyses.
Next, in our stepwise process, we worked with communities to assess social vulnerability and identify resilience strategies. Using participatory tools, we've identified local Indigenous definitions of health and well-being to use when assessing risks to people from ocean change. We further delineated specific dimensions of community-defined well-being and then surveyed participants on the expected impacts of ocean change to each one. Displayed here are the results from 2 communities. A couple of take-home points. First, the status of some well-being dimensions is expected to decline more than others. Cultural practices and physical health are the dimensions most sensitive to ocean change, followed by community connections. Some dimensions, such as knowledge transfer and self-determination, may be more resilient. Second, impacts are not uniform across communities, which may reflect varied dependence on marine resources, as well as existing community strengths. This reinforces the value of place-based research. Third, understanding the sensitivity of different well-being dimensions to ocean change can help to focus priority responses, planning, and investments. For example, our collaborative work identified tribally prioritized resilience actions to prepare for ocean change. From dozens of viable solutions, 3 to mention are increasing community access to diverse traditional foods, revitalized cultural practices and trade networks, such as Tribal Canoe Journey, and investing in culturally appropriate STEM education for tribal kids who are the future leaders. Bringing us to the final steps in our approach. To provide decision makers with the information they need to plan for ocean change and act, we co-designed our approach to vulnerability through transdisciplinary engagement. Our approach has sought to be relevant, reciprocal, collaborative, and actionable. When met with challenges, as all projects must face, we've learned important lessons along the way. A few that we would like to leave with you. Build and maintain trusted relationships. Outline a path for interdisciplinary integration, and allow enough time and be flexible to adjust as needed. To conclude, by taking a place-based approach, teams will be better informed by local social and ecological circumstances, and therefore more attuned to concerns of highest risk or reasons for hope where refugia and local capacity provide conditions for resilience. Thank you.